All right, so good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. As people continue to join us, we're just going to get started and introduce ourselves. My name is Megan Steiner. I work on the Pennsylvania Statewide School Improvement Team. We are the team that works with schools and their districts for schools that are designated in school improvement. However, a lot of the work we do, including this webinar series, applies to and is useful for all schools and districts, regardless of whether they're designated in school improvement or not. Um, and as I mentioned, this is being recorded, and I'm about to put in the chat the link, if it is of interest to anyone, of where this recorded webinar will later be posted, so that if you or colleagues are later interested in the recording of this webinar or the recordings of the other two webinars later in this series, that is where they will eventually be posted. And finally, as I mentioned, you'll see at the bottom of the slide a tiny URL link. That is where, whether you're watching this synchronously or watching the recording, this is where you can view the materials for this webinar and later on for the other webinars in the series. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Craig.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Sorry about some of the technical challenges to begin with, but my name's Craig Chin. I'm with USHCA, a longtime partner of IU13 and Pennsylvania Department of Ed, and I'm joined by my colleague, Jody Buckheit-Spolar, just to point out that former chief of HR for Pittsburgh Public Schools, so definitely local. But we're really excited to get started today, and today we're going to talk about strategic retention. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to start with a little bit welcome and warm up. And I understand that folks should have access to the chat function. And if others want to be as brave to come off mute, they're welcome to use that as well. But after the warm up, we're going to do a little bit of talking about what we mean by strategic retention. We're going to do a little bit of a scenario where we're going to ask you to, primarily via the chat function, to share some thoughts on how they would address a certain scenario regarding retention. We talk a little bit about stay surveys and stay conversations. We're going to summarize some best practices, and then we're going to really close it out. And at the end, I know Jody and I are willing to stick around for a bit. If you have any questions or comments at the end, we definitely want to take them at the time. Oh, sorry. The one thing I was going to ask you to do, if you're, and actually, Megan, I think the way the setup is, I don't think renaming themselves will matter because I don't think we can quite see everyone. So, and sorry about that. We'll go to the next slide. All right, so meeting norms as we spend our time together. I want everyone to think of focusing on the student experience as we talk about retention, as we talk about sort of keeping adults in the classroom, keeping adults in buildings and within your school systems and LEAs. But think of, the impact or the effect that all of us could have on the student experience. If you were to describe certain issues or challenges you're facing, we encourage you or ask you to describe behaviors and not people. And also share your experience and ask questions of us and each other. Look, we're going to share a lot of research trends, and we're not saying that every trend that we share is going to be applicable to your local situation. So push back on us if something that we talk about might not be as relevant or impactful in your local situation. What is learned here leaves here. Please apply this to your own role. Please apply this to your own work. And at the same time, too, respect the need for confidentiality. We might have some of your peers share some challenges they're having, and we ask you to sort of keep those to ourselves. So before you do the warm, I do want to remind you in the link that Megan provided, there's also a handbook in there as well. If you want to use it as a note taker, what it does, it follows along with the content that we're going to go through today. If you want to take some notes virtually in that, please feel free to. So via chat, I'm going to ask everyone to think of this question to share some thoughts. Why do staff and teachers stay in your school or your LEA? If you don't mind, via chat, share some of those reasons why folks stay. We're seeing a lot of things on leadership, connections with other staff, appreciation, sense of community, culture, making a difference in students' education. Thank you, George, for pointing that obvious one out. Making a difference. All great things. And team, as we spend our time together, there might be others who chime in, but definitely in alignment with some of the things we're going to talk about today and in alignment of some of the things we'll talk about in future webinars as well. So this is a quick framework that we use. Think of this as sort of the employee life cycle. If you were to start sort of at 1 o'clock, this is all the work that LEAs do around trying to get folks excited or potentially excited about working in their system. Pipeline development and recruitment, that eventually leads to selection and hiring. If those that are initially interested in career opportunities in your particular system, then they go through a selection and hiring process. And then after that, there's a what we call workforce alignment. That's really the work around how can we ensure we're getting our best teachers to where we need them the most? Often research will show that our highest need schools typically will have the newest teachers, or sometimes the least qualified, right? So this is sort of the work of trying to get our best teachers to where we need them. Career management and retention sort of go hand in hand, and we will talk about obviously both of these in our webinars together. But this is the work that what can be done to keep great folks around, keep great teachers around. Total compensation and benefits are the things that what are the either strategic or innovative ways that we can start to sort of structure compensation and benefits to make it more enticing, not only to attract talent, but also to keep them. And last but not least, this concept of principles human capital leaders. So from our perspective, we know that to hire, to maintain great culture, to retain folks, it takes a village. And principals are often at the forefront of that. They have a huge influence on who accepts the job, and they also have a huge influence on who stays. As we can attest to some of the chat sharing, is that, someone mentioned leadership, and that's definitely sort of part of this puzzle here. So we just shared this with you to kind of show sort of the overall framework, if you will, that there's a lot of pieces that go around all the effort to maintain or try to drive for educator quality. So now we're going to talk about strategic retention overview. So I think this probably is pretty common sense to everybody, right? But why focus on this work or this subject of retention? Because every effective educator you retain is one less vacancy you don't have to fill. And I think coupled the fact that in Pennsylvania is no different than other national trends, but unfortunately we're facing a teacher shortage right now. The profile of teachers you're probably hiring today is probably vastly different than they were 5, 10 years ago, if not more, or if not less, I might be able to say. So think of this way. If you can keep a great teacher around, it's one less vacancy that you have to try to recruit and hire for. So think of recruitment retention as sort of two sides of the same coin. So as I mentioned, those shortages, right? But to address shortages and to fill these open vacancies, typically what we see in a lot of school systems and districts, they often focus on recruitment, where maybe a decade ago, the strategy was, yeah, we're going to hire our way out of this high attrition that we're experiencing. Unfortunately, with the national short or the teacher shortages that we're facing, that's a much, much more daunting task uh, at hand. So without a focus on retention, you're simply filling a leaky bucket, if that makes sense. So as your school system might be losing a lot of educators, you're trying to, recruit and hire your way out of it. But as folks are continuing to leave, it's sort of a never-ending prophecy, if you will. So our point is that districts must focus on great recruitment and great retention. So some just research points here. So 90% of teacher demand is driven by teachers leaving the profession, and we're going to talk a little more about that in the next slide. And only about a third are leaving due to retirements. And one researcher made an estimation that for every teacher that you're replacing, it comes out to be $20,000 cost, if you will, per teacher. And if you think it nationally, this is about $1.2 billion nationally. So based on this national average, so if you think of again, I know that your particular school system, your particular LEA might vary, but for the most part, 84% of folks are staying. And when we say staying, that means they're staying in the same job that they're currently in. Another 8% are movers. And what we mean by movers are these are folks that are leaving their current job but staying within the school system. And there's another 8% that is leaving the LEA entirely. So the top, if you can see in the top in the green there, of that 8% who are movers, the majority of them, 30%, sorry, not the majority, the highest percent, they're changing schools involuntarily. So they're not even, they don't even have say or input in why they're leaving. They're being told to. And this could be due to enrollment reductions, programmatic changes. It could be other things, or maybe even school closings, what have you. But 30% of the folks who are moving within district are doing it against, not by choice. Then you can see the next two top factors are school factors, personal factors, and then other factors, right? Then if you go down to leavers, these are the folks that are leaving the district entirely. A majority of them, 38%, are retiring. 29%, they're actually still in K-12, they're just not teaching. So this could be a promotion, or they could just be moving to a different role. And then you can see the other percentages, caring for a family member, they might be going to a different occupation. But the point here is that, if you look at these different buckets, if you will, some of this turnover is controllable, if you will. The fact that, yes, 8% are retire, I'm sorry, of the 8%, 38% are retiring. Yeah, you could argue that might not be as controllable as others. But the folks that are moving involuntarily, other school factors, there might be something there that as LEAs that might be within our purview to impact. So just defining our terms, you're going to hear us use it today and just want to see just sort of set the stage if we're on the same page. So we think of retention as the rate that all employees stay or remain at a district or school. You can measure that by your school system or your LEA, or you can measure at the school level. Strategic retention is another term we often use, is the idea of keeping the top performers while simultaneously removing the weakest performers. So in other words, not all retentions created equal. There's some good turnover and some bad turnover, and we're going to talk about that in a couple of slides. Movers or migration, these are the individuals that move to a different job within the school system, within the school or the district. Then those who leave or attrition, these are the rate at which employees leave. And as we saw before, majority are leaving due to retirement, but it could also be resignation. It could be termination as well. But these are folks that are leaving the district or the profession. Turnover is the total effect of both attrition and migration. And this concept of career management is that think of these as both formal and informal roles, right? Maybe not every teacher wants to become an administrator in their school, but at the same time, they want some type of leadership exposure or leadership opportunity while keeping maybe a foot in the door, if you will, of their classroom and still be in front of the children. So this is a quick slide to talk about what we mean by good or bad turnover. So when you think of on the left-hand side, leavers, these are the folks, as a reminder, that are leaving your LEA. So you have those that are voluntarily leaving, retiring, going to a different system, or leaving K-12 in general. The idea is that we want to reduce that, right? Those that are by choice are want to do something different or want to do something in a different place. Then on the next to it, then you have the involuntary non-renewals. These are dismissals, involuntary resignations. Sometimes we see LEAs use a proxy as, resigned in lieu of termination. But these are the folks that, in most cases, or in some cases, are underperforming. You want to see that number go up, and that's actually considered good turnover. On the right-hand side, these are the folks that are moving within the LEA. So those that are going from a high need school to a low need schools, you want to minimize that. It goes back to the point I was making about workforce alignment, trying to either keep or attract your best educators to where you need them the most. Then next to that, those that go from a low need school to a high need schools, you want to actually try to increase that, right? You're trying to attract talent to the students that need them the most. And then you can also have some migration of movers between, the same level, going from a low need school to a low need schools, or going from a high need school to a high need school. So this just gives you a quick sort of boardwalk of what we mean by turnover can be good or bad. So what we know, and I think this resonates with what we just did via chat, but what we see from research that great teachers are seeking, they're looking for great leaders to work for. We saw that in the chat. Growth in profession, we saw that in the chat as well. Recognition, meaningful compensation, and they also want a collaborative working environment, whether it's time and space to be able to collaborate, or at the same time just being able to know that there's someone or a team that I can go to for support, depending on what I'm struggling with or need help in. So, and think of it this way, as we talked about that pie slice, principal as human capital leader, a school leader has the greatest impact on whether a teacher stays or goes. And I don't think that would probably surprise many in this webinar. So when we talk about strategic retention, think of this way, the top educators produce stronger gains with students. Again, I don't think that will surprise anyone that better teachers are going to show stronger growth with their students that they teach. So the research will show that top teachers will actually gain 5 to 6 more months of learning per year. And also from a principal perspective, top principals will actually gain, 2 to 7 more months of learning gains. The second point is low performers don't always opt out. And so a lot of times that if you are a struggling teacher or an ineffective teacher, sorry, and you have 9+ years of experience, probably they're planning to stick around for a while, depending on your pension system, depending on if they're close to being vested or they are vested, or trying to maximize sort of their return, if you will, on their retirement. They're probably going to stick around for as long as they can. Because at the same time, if they're struggling here, they might not be as confident where else they can go. So at this point, they're pretty committed to sticking around. At the same time, more effective teachers are available to hire. So research will show that there's a 75% chance of replacing an ineffective teacher with a more effective one. Again, if you have a decent teacher who leaves, the probability isn't as high given the teacher shortage. But if you have an effective teacher and you're trying to replace him or her, you have a good 3 and 4th chance to find someone who's better. And I mentioned the research before. Turnover is expensive. Think of every person who leaves, it's about $20,000 to fill each vacancy. So there's a host of research that we actually have done around these different lenses. And the idea here is that if you're a school leader, if you think of the staff in your school, they have different sort of backgrounds. They have a different pathway on how they came into your school. Whether you were a mover, whether you were a leaver, or whether you were forced to come to your school or you chose to. Also, I could have came through a traditional certification program, or you also have alternative certification. It could even differ by subject, by school type, by generation, by experience, by gender, and by diversity as well. The idea is that each one of these, there's a host of research that will show there are different levers, if you will, or motivators that keep people around. So our point here is that retention needs to be individualized because this one size fit all approach to trying to keep your staff just won't really cut it. But knowing that there's different everyone brings something rich and different to the table, and leveraging those sort of needs, if you will, and motivators are critical. So this is just doing a little bit deeper dive into teachers of color, for example. So key considerations for this no one size fit all solution. Leverage performance if you can. If you know who your best educators and teachers are, also try to focusing on them to try to keep. Also, different people need different strategies. So you might have a handful of new teachers in your building. One relocated, one came through an alt-cert program, one's a career changer who's been an engineer their whole life. Each one of those individuals are probably going to need different support in order to thrive and grow in their profession. We also know that teacher-employee voice is essential, and we can talk a little bit more of that a little bit later on today. And just a few highlights from our research around teachers of color. So higher rates of turnover in general, more than half are prepared alternatively. They need support in how to teach content, 2 to 3 times more likely to work in a high-need school, and also school leadership and culture is a contributing factor to turnover. At the same time, retention as well.
So we know that district leaders, like all of you, have sharpened your focus on retention as a key element in human capital management that requires strategies, structures, and goals. Yet we can still be in a place where retention roles and accountability can lack clarity. Key players may not even view themselves as having a role in retention, which can happen when there is shared ownership. And certainly retention is an area where there is shared ownership. It is not the responsibility of a single person, a single role, or even one element of the district. So we're going to use this circle diagram to sort of unpeel the main layers that we think of when we talk about ownership and accountability for retention. So that outer layer represents that there must be enabling structures and policies at the district level that support strong retention. And some of them are named there. The next slide is going to give us even more specificity. But at a high level, we know at the district level, we need to have structures and policies. We have to collect and analyze data that can then inform responsive actions to strengthen the district's ability to retain staff. They have to marshal resources to apply those strategies. And at a high level, there's a responsibility to build capacity throughout the organization from awareness as well as execution of strong retention practices. And the accountability here is suggested to be at a high level, that of human resources together with principal supervisors. Human resources is doing those things to supply the data, the strategies, etc. And principal supervisors, particularly with regard to school-based retention, are the ones that are really showing it as a priority in their interactions with principals and building capacity in those they are supervising. That next layer in gray really goes to the line supervisor in schools. That's the principal, and in central office, it may be a manager. But when you think about those retention lenses that Craig just reviewed, at this level, it is the supervisor, the principal, or the manager who is taking those lenses and applying them so that there really are individualized or differentiated approaches to retention that meet the characteristics and the needs of the specific individuals in their school or in their department. And then in the blue at the center of that, we really suggest that teachers and employees have a role to play as well in their own retention, because it's important that they communicate what matters to them and what they need. Now that really flows back up through the layers, because it's up to the consent, the additional layers to really create a culture where teachers believe that their voice and their input would matter, so they feel free to share and communicate what matters to them. And there have to be structures. That needs to be something that is recurring, and there are ways for teachers to share and communicate what matters to them and potentially what they need to stay in their school or in the district. So this slide takes those three layers and breaks them down a little bit further. So if you start at the left and we think about school leaders really are on the front lines of strategic retention. And if you'll remember, we just defined strategic retention as the work of identifying your strong performers and prioritizing what it takes to retain them, and then identifying those who are not meeting a standard of performance or who must improve. And if you offer that strong support and they are not able to improve, then doing the work of removing low performers. That's the heart of strategic retention that will build a high quality workforce over time. And so school leaders, again, are on the front lines of that. HR is in the center of this slide because HR is really supporting retention practices district-wide. They are supporting school leaders, and they are also supporting principal supervisors and other supervisors. There are a number of bullets there. I won't read them all, but to focus on a few of them, it is so important that they are providing data at the school level. So principals really understand what's happening in their school as compared to others, and particularly as compared to others that are similarly situated. That data can drive responsive actions and help principals make decisions. They also need to analyze district-wide data. So again, at that outer layer of systems, they are able to advocate for responsive policies, practices, maybe compensation issues that will, again, enable district-wide retention. And it's necessary that they offer guidance and support to removing those low performers that we just spoke about, the importance of identifying and dealing with in the strategic retention space. And so that guidance and support for removing low performers, if it is necessary, is something that is very necessary and really valued by school leaders to have that support within their district. And then on the right-hand side are those principal supervisors. Again, they are really taking that data, analyzing it for their schools, for their school leaders, and then taking it to the school leader and really strategizing side by side with them to identify where are opportunities to strengthen the retention practices within that school. They're looking at transfer data. What schools are getting a lot of applicants in? Which ones are seeing maybe a preponderance of teachers trying to leave the school, et cetera, and really translating that into actions that can strengthen retention practices at the school level. And again, they are can and should be a strong feedback loop to HR about what's happening in their schools and how HR can be more responsive to what the particular schools and school leaders need to strengthen their retention practices. So I hope everyone can read this. We're going to stop here for a minute and let you read silently, give you about a minute or so to do that. But before you start doing that, what we would like you to do is when you read through this, reflect on the optimal role that a principal or other supervisor plays in building a culture that attracts and retains staff. What's that optimum role that a leader plays? And then think about 2 or 3 actions or approaches that you would identify as strengths of many of the principals in your district. And then where is an area or what is an area where you want to play a role in building more capacity in your district for retention at the school level or at the department level. So again, you're going to read through this and then jot down 2 or 3 actions or strategies that you see as strengths in many of your schools, and maybe one area where you want to play a role in building more capacity for retention. And you can start putting that in the chat. And this is an area where I would love if there were 1 or 2 brave individuals to come off mute and share their thoughts on what they've written. As some of you read and reflect and maybe jot down notes, is there anyone that would be willing to come off mute and, share what comes up for you when you think about the optimal role that a leader plays, a school leader or a department leader plays in building a culture that attracts and retains, and something that you're seeing in your district that you think is really a positive, or a strength area in many of your schools? Awesome, Deanna. Thank you.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can. Thank you.
Okay. One of the things I see that's really powerful in a lot of our schools with teacher retention is getting them involved in the school improvement initiatives, going through the data with them, letting them understand why they're in school improvement or why their schools are floundering, and having a strong input in, how to go ahead and build the plans and create action steps. The teachers feel so valued in these schools and really want to become a part of the day-to-day improvements.
Thank you, Deanna. We know that, teachers and other professionals value feeling as though they're part of something that's bigger than themselves, that they're really contributing to a vision, to a real change. And so making certain that they feel ownership in that is a really strong strategy for building community and therefore retention.
And sometimes they just include them, as a name in the process, but when they really truly get them involved, it makes a huge difference.
Absolutely. Thank you. I am seeing some really strong comments in the chat here. Thank you so much for sharing. We'll make certain
Thank you.
that you get the chat so you can see all of these thoughts and reflections. That opportunity for teacher leadership, both formal and informal, is really something that is important to retaining teachers, particularly opportunities like that at hard to staff schools. When you think about what's the value proposition, sometimes hard to staff schools or high need schools can struggle with how do they compete for talent to retain. So thinking about things like a school that is really rich with opportunities to innovate or to have, again, formal or informal leadership roles can be important. Sharing, looking at interest of both the teacher and teachers, instructional skills. All of these things can be very, very important ways for school leaders to build that culture that will attract and retain educators. I love the actionable feedback. Teachers are hungry for that. They want somebody to notice what they're doing, give them the specific feedback that is actionable. They really value that. So being in a school where that's what they receive, again, really starts to build that almost reputation that this is a school, this is a place where you can really grow and learn and stretch as a professional. So thank you very much. Really great thoughts in here. See the importance of PLCs, taking the time to listen to new teachers, really creating a nice repository here of strategies. And we'll make certain we get all these to you. Okay, so to move on in the interest of time, we're now going to sort of do a what would you do? And I'm going to be looking for participation both in the chat as well as a couple folks that would be willing to come off mute and share. But we are going to consider retention actions through the lens of two very different teachers. So here is the first teacher, and we're going to do them one at a time. And if you look here, this is a chemistry teacher, and take a look at the characteristics of this chemistry teacher. Right? She's a career changer, obviously, 45 years old. She was a chemical engineer, has decided to switch professions. So if you were the school leader where this high potential, calling her a rock star, teacher has landed, and you're really excited about this and feel that she can make a strong contribution to your school, from the get-go, what would be your approach to making certain that she was kind of locked in and a strong candidate for retention in your building, not looking around to make a move, but somebody that was really going to stay? So please respond in the chat what it might take to retain this particular teacher with this profile. And again, after you do that, if one or two of you would raise your hand to come off chat, that would be amazing. What would it take? Yeah. And I love, Adam, that you're recognizing this may be somebody that has lots of content, being a former chemical engineer, but may lack that instructional expertise. And that can lead to a lot of disaffection if you're not feeling success in terms of delivering content. So absolutely. I love the idea of getting them involved in a career STEM night so they can share their expertise, their experience, really feel elevated in that kind of way, really optimizing the ways that they can contribute. Does she understand an adolescent learner? You know, do her expectations align? She comes in probably envisioning one way she's going to have an experience and an impact. And if that is misaligned, you may have to really step in and help, you know, reframe the expectations and help her understand that it might take some time to bring all the pieces together. Anyone want to come off mute and share what's coming up for you verbally? Thank you, Kelly. Love to hear what's on your mind.
I was just thinking even just a conversation with the teacher to check in, see how things are going for her and ask like, are there any things that she feels that she needs more support with so that she's having some voice in how we're supporting her as well, in addition to what we feel that we could provide as a school leader too.
Absolutely. You know, we don't know the culture that someone has come from, but maybe they were not even needing to ask for help in their prior role, and that might not come easily to them. So making certain that you're reaching out and opening that space, so to speak, for them to feel comfortable sharing what they need. You know, I really, you know, need help with instructional practices, etc. So yes, absolutely that communication. And we know from research that the engagement of a school leader with a new teacher, whether they're a career changer or it's their very first job, but that relationship between the principal and a new teacher has an outsized impact on their decision to stay. So that relationship is so important. So thanks for bringing that up. Let's go to the next teacher. So this is a different set of characteristics. This is somebody, we say high performer, but we see that it's a new teacher. So maybe it's a high potential performer, but someone early in their career, strong tech skills, a male. What do you see here? What might it take to retain this teacher that's different from the first teacher? In that key area of special ed. So you can't lose a special education, high potential, high performing teacher who's chosen your school. So what would you do to retain this teacher? Thank you. Mentorship matters so much. And I love that you, Adam, inserted quality mentor teachers. I was just with a group of school leaders earlier today, and they talked about coaching the coaches and coaching the mentors, because assigning a mentor is one thing, but really making certain that you are attentive to the quality of mentorship is so important. these ideas of check-ins, thanks, George, making certain that there is a specific course for struggling teachers, because most new teachers have struggles. And so making certain that you're connecting with them with those resources, again, that's that connecting role that school leader plays. There may be resources and support, but it's up to the school leader to really make those connections and identify who needs them. Anybody want to come off mute and just share what's coming up for you? Want to give you that opportunity. Got it. So what we've talked about differentiating based on sort of the lenses of the teachers that we've just reviewed, and all the teachers that have a set of lenses that come together and make them unique in terms of the strategies and approaches that are necessary to retain them. Now we want to think about what might be some common challenges that these two very different teachers might both face. So for example, what if you were lucky enough to get both of these teachers to come to your school? Chemistry, special ed, they both seem to be, high potential candidates, but maybe the commute to your school from where they live is really far and really challenging, or there's a struggle with the parking situation or some barrier such as that you feel, even though you feel like you've done a great job in terms of making them feel connected to the school, a sense of the community, a part of the community early on, and you really think, that there is that strong connection, but you have this sense that what if they're going to make the move and try to go someplace that takes away that barrier, that long commute, or, another barrier that is common to really all the teachers at the school, or many of them. What kind of conversation might you have, or what might you suggest be a way of addressing that? Love for somebody to come off mute if you're willing to share how you might make the case to two high potential high performers like this if they're facing a challenge such as that, a common challenge. Sometimes we think of value proposition. Are you making clear what the value proposition, and sometimes being open and just saying to a teacher, particularly one that is new, I know it's a brutal commute to get here, the traffic on, I-95, getting here before our exit or whatever is always a struggle every day. But I encourage you to talk to some of the teachers who have felt that being part of this community is worth it, or maybe some strategies that they have about leaving at a different time. But sometimes hitting it straight on and not like letting them slip away can really work. But making certain that you are creating a value proposition that hopefully overrides what some of those barriers are, and that you're making it clear and not being afraid to not just say it in the interview or have it be on, some flyer that tells about your school, but really connecting with them and sharing that value proposition when you're talking with them, and acknowledging that you recognize there are barriers, but there really are opportunities here, there's support here, it's a strong community, etc., whatever that value proposition is for your school. So if we go to the next slide, we talked earlier in these slides about we want teachers to feel as though they can share what they want and what they need, and what they need to remain at the school or in the district. But we have to make certain that, like all professionals, that they believe that they are working in an environment where their voice, where their suggestions, where their opinions and their, needs are recognized, they're valued, they're heard, and that they can see that. And so having systems and structures and programs to make certain that there are lots of opportunities to hear teacher voice and respond to it are really important. So we're going to take just a few slides here and think about that for a moment. So two essential tools that are different but both necessary are an exit survey and a stay survey and or stay conversation. So potentially there are three things there: exit survey, stay survey, and stay conversations. And they're both important, but they're different. An exit survey lets you know why people have left, but as a lagging indicator, the person's already gone. You didn't get a chance to respond to things that might have caused them to leave. But it can certainly help you identify trends and why people are leaving and develop some responsive strategies. Some programs, or make a tweak or advocate for a tweak, maybe in a weak spot in your compensation system, et cetera. But you can get trends about why people are leaving from an exit survey, but you can't use it to proactively address something with someone that is maybe thinking about leaving. A stay survey, of course, gives you that opportunity to engage with staff who are present, who are there, but really ferret out if there are reasons or things that might be causing them to doubt whether or not they are going to remain in the school or in the district. So it gives you that chance to hear directly, what they're thinking, and to respond and to create a feedback loop with those staff members who share with you something that they need or want. So exit surveys and stay surveys are both really important tools. As we go to the next slide, I will share that in your workbook, there is a really nice section about stay surveys, both stay surveys as well as stay conversations. And so I encourage you, it's got a bank of questions if you're going to do some stay interviews that you could pull from. And again, really a nice resource for you. So I'd encourage you to look in the workbook at that. So again, we just talked about these two key tools that really call out the importance of employee voice. And you can see here, I won't read them all to you in the interest of time, but pros and cons for both of them. Certainly exit surveys are easy to administer. They can be a link off of a resignation form, etc. But they notoriously don't have strong response rates. So again, definitely pros and cons, but we certainly encourage them because they do give you trend data about why people are leaving. And again, as we just talked about, stay surveys help you understand why people stay. They really identify the factors that you might be able to respond to in a way that influences or changes, the way a staff member is leaning. And boy, if that's a high-performing staff member getting in and really getting a chance to make the case and respond to what they're concerned about is a really positive thing to keep that person on your staff. But again, a little less control sometimes if you have a stay survey in terms of the response rate. So if we go to the next slide, I think there is, yeah. So we love the idea of this pulse survey. So this is kind of a quick hit, think more real time, often with new teachers. So maybe you've just done a new teacher meeting and you do a quick pulse survey that says, what do you want to learn more about? What support do you need that you're not getting, etc. Something that really can be a leading indicator that gets a quick response about an action that you can take going forward. So think about those kind of quick hits, particularly with the new teachers. So you're really building the scaffolding that they need to feel as though they are successful and able to continue to contribute at your school and in your district. And then one last here about seeking employee voice are about focus groups and interviews, which can be so powerful. I know Craig and I often, go into districts and conduct focus groups, and they are so powerful. The room fills up with their Post-it notes and comments, and the conversation can be really rich. They're a heavy lift, however, and so thinking about when and how to do them, because they really can't complement surveys, because you fill out a survey and you think, well, I told them what I think, but you don't really know whether or not that's an isolated opinion and, is not one that's shared by many. But you really get a chance in a focus group to let, kind of group themes emerge. But again, a pretty heavy lift to pull off. So thinking again, where and with whom, is it something that you want to do in particular schools, maybe high need schools, to understand more what's happening there? But certainly we know that these kinds of opportunities do impact retention. If there's a school that is struggling and you take the time and effort to come out and really have those kinds of group conversations and focus groups, it can really show a staff or a department that there's a lot of care and concern about what they're experiencing. So all these are tools to make certain that employees in your districts or in your school really recognize that their voice matters.
Thank you, Jody. All right, as we close out the session, we just want to do a quick review of retention best practices. So here's a quick summary. In a lot of these themes we talked about, both in the scenario, in the warm-up, and some of the things that we are talking about earlier, but teacher voice and engagement, asking teachers what they need to say. The example that we shared with the what would you do with the career changer, the former chemical engineer, and I apologize to Deanna or Kelly, but they came off mute and they shared, talking to them individually to try to find out what motivates them or how they're doing and what supports they can be provided, right? Really, and also trying to understand the underlying reasons for turnover. So Jody talked about sort of this lagging and leading sort of methods, if you will. But both of those are powerful tools to try to figure out, okay, what can we do to prevent turnover in the future? And then for the stay or even focus groups, there are some efforts that could be made to help be proactive in trying to keep people as well. Providing opportunities for teachers to network and build community. So our team, we did a research study on STEM teachers. And one thing that we found around retention was a lot of STEM teachers, say science, for example. Yes, they received PD, but one thing that they really cherished or still wanted was to be exposed to sort of very content-oriented, science-oriented PD, being able to stay on top of sort of latest trends within their particular area. So, and especially we found that more of an acute problem in middle school or in a K-8, if you will, where sometimes you might have one science teacher, depending on the size of a school, but a lot of them were yearning for not only networking, but also building that community beyond their school. The second theme, and we talked a lot about this, tracking and leveraging data. It's great that you have a retention number if you can measure it, but be even greater if you can actually start to break it down by performance level or break it down by some of those lenses that we talked about before. And also tracking and analyzing turnover by reason can be hugely powerful. We understand that a lot of times we've seen exit surveys done, and a big category that teachers use is personal. Why did you leave? Well, it's the personal reasons, right? So that's where things like a focus group or a stay conversation or an exit interview can start to unpack some of these generic answers you might receive from just a survey. Differentiate and individualize, again, it's think of those lenses that we talked about before, mixing and matching strategies to try to retain. And we would try to push and encourage everyone to focus on your rock stars, right? Focus on those that you can't live without, if that makes sense. And then a lot of folks mentioned the chat leadership. It's a huge opportunity. And leadership, mind you, can be both formal and informal. Of course, there are formal roles with either curriculum chairs, with being mentor teachers, new teacher support personnel, if you will. But there can also be other informal roles that teachers can be given either on an ad hoc basis or on an interim basis, depending on what issue that you're dealing with. Celebrating excellence is hugely important, and also induction. So I also want to point out that a few of these, like teacher voice and engagement, and also celebrating excellence, we're going to talk more about those themes in a future webinar around culture. And also the last one in particular, induction, we are going to be talking about the new teacher experience in our next webinar coming up. All right, Megan, if you don't mind going to one more slide. for the next slide. Thank you. So very quickly, April 2nd at 4 p.m., we're going to have our next webinar on onboarding and new teacher experience. Excuse me. April 10th, which is a Wednesday. April 2nd is a Tuesday, by the way. April 10th, we're going to have one on school climate and culture to drive retention. So again, if you can't make future ones, the link that was provided in the chat, you can see a recorded version. But we hope to see a lot of you in the next webinar. In the meantime, Jody and I and Megan will stick around a little bit if anyone had any more questions or comments, but we're here if anyone wants to discuss or chat about anything. Thank you all for your participation. Everyone's been great.